I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister, after the party selects its next leader through a robust, nationwide, competitive process.
So Justin Trudeau has just resigned as the leader of the Liberal Party. Why did he resign?
Well, he resigned, Stephen, because he has no other options left. He has exhausted all of his political capital. He has no one in the party that is supporting him to stay on at this point, besides perhaps his own internal party staff. And he had no other option. The reason, however, that he's not leaving is because he believes he's the best person to lead this country over the next few months when it comes to Canada-US relations and Donald Trump.
So what were the series of events that led up to this resignation? Obviously, if he thought he was going to win the next election, I presume that he wouldn't have resigned.
Yeah, it's the first major caucus revolt happened a few months ago when the Liberals lost an easy by-election in downtown Toronto, St. Paul's, which has been a Liberal riding for 30 years. They lost that riding to the Conservatives, which was a shock defeat, prompting the first caucus revolt of Toronto area MPs saying, you have no hope here. We have to have a different leader. He was able to weather that storm, but the biggest news was what happened just before the holiday break, just before Christmas, when his Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, announced her resignation from cabinet with a scathing letter to Justin Trudeau. That was followed by a caucus revolt that this time was far too big to ignore for Justin Trudeau, and he had no other option. Really, it's been two major events at the end of 2024, but as your audience likely know, Justin Trudeau has not been popular since the Freedom Convoy protest, since the trucker protest at the beginning of 2022. Since then, his polling has been negative, and he has not been able to find any victories at all, and that has really led us to where we are today.
Some opinion polls suggest that his party could be completely wiped out, down to just 9 MPs in the next general election. What are the issues that have caused Justin Trudeau to become so unpopular? You mentioned the freedom protests. What has caused this massive unpopularity?
It's really the cost of living in this country that has become out of control, and it has forced people who don't pay attention to politics to start looking for answers as to why their lives are so miserable now, why everything is so expensive. Because of the out of control cost of living, which has been brought on by several policies, most obviously uncontrolled open borders, mass immigration in this country, Canadians have had to start looking for answers and looking at their political leaders and saying, who's in charge here and how did this get so out of control? Why is life in this country so much more difficult than I remember it being when I was growing up or when my parents were in this country? That's what has really triggered this issue, and that's the issue that Pierre Poilievre, the very much so looking like the next Prime Minister of Canada, has focused on for the past 2 years. The cost of living, the rise in taxes, the issues that are facing this country, out of control crime, immigration, and even censorship in this country that the Justin Trudeau, the Trudeau government has tried to bring about. Really, the issue that has brought about all of this attention is the fact that life in this country is so expensive. To give you some perspective, Stephen, Ontario, usually one of Canada's richest provinces, is now poorer on a per capita GDP basis than Mississippi, the poorest state in the United States. So the issues in this country are serious. Canadians are poorer, and life is far more difficult than they remember, and that's brought about this significant polling disaster for Trudeau's Liberals.
To what extent is immigration an issue, a political issue in Canada? I know there's been mass migration under Justin Trudeau's premiership. He's allowed in millions of people from places like India. How much is that topic on people's mind when they're thinking about Justin Trudeau and his unpopular government?
It's interesting because in this country, immigration was never actually an issue. As far back as our founding in 1867, immigration was never seen as a concern by the Canadian people. And the Conservative Party of Canada was one of the few conservative parties in the Western world that was extremely pro-immigration. But Justin Trudeau changed that because he made the system so uncontrollable. He brought in millions of people. He brought in millions of people that are incompatible with Canadian culture and the Canadian people, which has triggered people to start looking around and saying, hold on a second, this seems a little out of control. This is not what I remember it being. I don't recall my cities looking this way. I don't recall being scared about my safety in the streets of our major cities. But that's the case now. And for immigration to become a major topic in this country, that is indicative of the fact that immigration is on the top of voters' minds, because it never used to be. And because Trudeau has brought it there, it is a significant issue. And Canadians who are plugged in know that mass immigration precipitated the spike in our housing crisis, precipitated the spike in the cost of living. And people are starting to put two and two together, Stephen, and starting to say, wait a second, I think these issues are connected, and there's one person responsible. That's Justin Trudeau.
What kind of emotions do people feel about Justin Trudeau? Obviously, we know he's unpopular because of the opinion polls, but is there a real visceral hatred towards him from much of the population, or is it just a general dislike?
It is a hatred. It is a hatred for many in this country, which harkens back to the memories of some people who remember the reaction his father had in the country. People look at Justin Trudeau as someone who is a extremely divisive figure, who uses wedge politics to advance his own political agenda at whatever cost. He doesn't care about wedging families apart and tearing the country apart if it means that the Liberal Party can succeed. He made a career out of that for the last 9 years. Trudeau also has a way about himself, the way he carries himself and the way he talks, that many Canadians do not appreciate, they don't like. First of all, they look at him as someone entirely unqualified for the role that he has, someone who really relied on his last name to get him into political power. Remember, he was a drama teacher before becoming a politician and eventually the leader of the Liberal Party and Prime Minister. He has no real background that would justify his lofty position. The way he walked, genuinely down to that, the way he walked, the way he carried himself, the way he, just his deportment in many ways turned Canadians off. It made himself appear as someone who wasn't necessarily taking his job seriously, wasn't someone who talked to Canadians like adults, but rather like they were children, and he was their teacher, leading them. The thing is that there's a lot of different stories about Justin Trudeau. The one that I think is most accurate is the fact that he presents himself in a way that doesn't do himself any justice, because behind closed doors, he's actually deeply cunning and serious and is willing to advance his agenda at whatever cost. He's a serious guy, but when he goes out in public, he presents himself as someone completely opposite. Many Canadians see it as clownish behavior, and that has really resulted in this position we're in today.
But it hasn't always been like this. He was very popular. He's won, how many elections has he won? At least 2, right?
He's won 3. This was his third. 2021 was his third election victory.
Yeah, so he's won a lot of elections, and in Canada and around the world, he was lauded as this liberal hero, this, the leader of the kind of woke movement. He was a good-looking guy. He's pretty handsome. He's fairly charismatic, and he wasn't always unpopular. Like you said, he won 3 elections. So how has he, can you just take us through his kind of 9 years in power, how he won how he became Prime Minister originally, how he was so popular, and what led to his downfall?
Well, it begins in 2013 when he became the leader of the Liberal Party. He basically ran uncontested, essentially, in the 2013 Liberal leadership race. He had assembled a team around him that has stuck with him for the most part to today in the Prime Minister's office that really are the brains of the operation, most notably his Chief of Staff, Katie Telford. They established a plan to take over the Prime Minister's office back in around 2011, 2012. It started in 2013 with the Liberal leadership race. He then used the progressive politics and progressive agenda that was seen by Barack Obama as his kind of calling card in 2015 to defeat Stephen Harper, winning him a majority government. Many of the policies that he advocated for didn't end up actually becoming actual law in this country, most notably being he wanted to reform the way that the Canadians voted for the government. He wanted to get rid of our voting system and change it into something that he believed to be more democratic, something that was supported by young progressive voters. Another policy was cannabis legalization, which he did accomplish in the country. He came in as a very charismatic, energetic, handsome figure with an energy that really hadn't been seen before in this country, perhaps until his own father carried himself into office on that kind of wave. And the first thing he did, which made him a darling of the progressive world and the left-wing press across the world, was he had a gender-balanced cabinet in 2015, having equal men and women. And he used this as a way to show that he was this ultra-feminist, ultra-progressive, new world leader. But the wheels in the train very quickly fell off as scandal after scandal began to mount on Justin Trudeau, presenting himself really as this corrupt figure, as a guy that had one image to the world, one image to Canadians, and then an entirely different image behind the scenes. He had the Aga Khan scandal, where he basically went on a family vacation to the Aga Khan, who was a lobbyist for the government. He had the SNC-Lavalin scandal, which resulted in his Attorney General, the first Indigenous woman to lead that position, to resign in disgrace from her position. He eventually had to fire her from the Liberal Party. He then had the We Charity scandal, another major corruption scandal, followed, of course, by several others. And the luster was lost on Justin Trudeau as soon as he came into power, because it was obvious that he was a dramatic figure. He was all about imagery, right? He had one image for the Canadian people and one entirely different image behind closed doors.
You mentioned the gender balanced cabinet. One of the most interesting things about Trudeau was his obsession with what I would call wokeism. So he would send out these tweets about 2+ QIA, spirit animal, blah, 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 and he would be presented in almost a comical way, just how obsessed he was with diversity, with identity, and so on. Can you talk about him perhaps being, why was he so progressive? Has he always been like that? What kind of impact did he have on Canadian society from an identity politics or woke perspective?
Well, I mean, it's significant. He has soured the country on his policies of this extreme wokeism. He has leaned into it because he believes that is where the Canadian people are. He believes that the Canadian people want this extreme transgender agenda. They support, open borders immigration. Part of that comes back to this idea that he believes in what he described as a post-national country. He wanted Canada to become the first post-national country in the world. He claims that Canada really has no culture, no founding identity. And that allowed him to use this radical woke agenda. Now, to be quite honest with you, I don't even know if he truly believes in it himself. I think he sees it as a useful political weapon to use for his own benefit. But it's deeply embarrassing. The things that he was tweeting, the things that he was posting, it made this country just look unserious. And the Canadian people aren't an unserious people. We are a serious people. And I think the Canadian people feel as though they deserve far better than someone who's just parading around, going to gay pride parades, and trying to, push this woke agenda on the rest of the world who aren't interested at all. And I think it'll basically die. The woke agenda will die when Justin Trudeau leaves.
Can you talk about some of the policies that he enacted in Canada to do with transgenderism and freedom of speech? In Britain, many people view Canada as one of the wokest nations in the West, if not the wokest. So how did he turn Canada into one of this crazy woke country?
Well, let's start with the transgenderism, the radical gender ideology aspect. One of the things that he was able to pass in the country was what was cleverly described as the anti-transitioning bill, or what was described as basically a legislation, a conversion therapy. So anti-conversion therapy, right? And basically what that means is that it is illegal in Canada for a parent to advise their child not to transition. In fact, it could become criminal for a parent to tell their child that actually, no, you're not a boy. You're not a boy, Sally. You're not a girl, Timmy. So he made that criminal. And then even the Conservatives voted for that legislation, which is remarkable. Look at, for example, euthanasia, which I know you've reported on significantly. We have one of the most liberal euthanasia-made regimes in the world. Canadians are now allowed to go to a doctor. A doctor's allowed to prescribe them death to solve their medical issues. It is unbelievable what he's been able to do with that. You just go down the list, and now let's talk about free speech and censorship. Probably one of the most damaging aspects of his tenure as Prime Minister. I want to call your attention to Bill C-11, an act that basically gave a federal body the ability to manipulate social media algorithms to promote what they determined to be Canadian content. So the Canadian government now gets to determine what Canadians see on social media if the government determines it to be Canadian content. Bill C-18, a bill that basically resulted in all news on Facebook and Instagram in Canada being shut down. Canadians can no longer use Facebook to see the news because they tried to force Facebook to pay news sources for links, which resulted in news being shut out of Facebook. Lastly, a bill that is still being debated, it is not law yet, but it may in fact be, is a bill that would essentially put a Canadian behind bars if they dared to post an idea on social media that was determined to be hate speech. I know this will be familiar to English viewers, to the British audience. We are now having a law that is being debated in the House of Commons that could force a tracking device on a Canadian if the Attorney General in the country is determined that that Canadian may commit an online hate crime. So we have pre-crime being debated in the House of Commons, where a Canadian could be forced to wear an ankle monitor or could be forced to be under house arrest. It is unbelievable, and it has had a chilling effect in this country.
Where do you rank Justin Trudeau amongst Canada's prime ministers? You know, if you've got Stephen Harper, you've got his dad, various other prime ministers, where does Trudeau rank?
I think he has to rank very close to the bottom, if not at the bottom. And I want to be objective with this. I do. I think that over time will be only slightly friendly to Justin Trudeau, as it is for many politicians. But it is really a bad situation that he's leaving behind. He leaves behind a country that is far worse than the one he inherited. And that really should be the barometer, the test for how well a world leader does. Do they leave the country better than when they inherited it? And the country is worse off, significantly worse off. He also leaves behind a divided nation, a nation with churches that are scorched to the ground all across the country, a nation that no longer looks like it has for the past 150 years, with massive demographic shifts that are going to be that'll have severe impacts in the future. I would say that he ranks very low because of just how divisive he is. He has not been able to unite this country at all. He leaves behind a country in very bad shape, one that the next prime minister will have a very big difficulty trying to fix.
Who could be the next Liberal leader?
It looks right now that it would likely, in my opinion, be in an interim basis, Dominic LeBlanc, the new finance minister, a man who accompanied Justin Trudeau to Mar-a-Lago in following Donald Trump's victory. But also Mark Carney, the former Bank of Canada and Bank of England governor, appears to be the front runner to take over the country. Mark Carney is, of course, someone who is well educated, knows what he's doing when it comes to economics and banking, but does have a very progressive economic worldview and a progressive fiscal and political worldview like Justin Trudeau. It could be Dominic LeBlanc, Mark Carney, or perhaps a man named Francois-Philippe Champagne, a longtime cabinet minister with Justin Trudeau. Interestingly, LeBlanc and Champagne have done a remarkable job compared to their colleagues of staying out of the press, of not being attacked for their incompetence, for their wokeness, looking like serious people, acting like serious people, unlike the rest of the Liberal cabinet. And I think that has positioned them in the best position, in the best place to eventually become the new leader. But almost certainly it will be on a short interim basis because Pierre Poilievre will dominate the next federal election. And that's an objective take, because if the polls are indicating it would be, a less than 1% chance for the Liberals to win.
And just finally, tell viewers a bit about Pierre Poilievre. This is the leader of the Conservative Party, potentially the next Prime Minister of Canada. As you say, all the opinion polls suggest that's where it's heading. Who is Pierre Poilievre? Is he a real Conservative? What could he do to Canada? Pierre
Poilievre has spent his life as a politician. In fact, it was his first job. At 25, he became a member of Parliament, and he's held his seat since then. Poilievre is a man that knows how to time his announcements very well. He understands communication and media, similarly to Justin Trudeau in a sense. Poilievre was one of the most famous Conservative MPs well before he became the leader. His conservative positions are strong in some instances. Of course, on a fiscal basis, he's very conservative. He has voted, when he was not leader of the party, on certain positions that many would not determine to be conservative. And our system, doesn't really allow for free votes in this instance. So it's tough to determine how someone feels the way they do. But if a recent interview with Jordan Peterson is anything to go off of when it comes to Pierre Poilievre, Poilievre was asked by Jordan Peterson how to avoid the many problems that conservative governments end up running into, like the Tories did in the UK, of drifting leftward, of trying to solve the world's problems with progressive policies. Poilievre said that he knows better. He knows that this is a factor in conservative governments, and he knows that he is going to be expected to do progressive things, but he is committed publicly to saying he won't do them. And I think Canadians just want someone who is competent, who can communicate in an effective way, that doesn't talk down to them, and presents a serious image to the rest of the world, that Canada is a serious country once again, and we should be taken seriously. That's the hope, and I think Poilievre can achieve that.
Thank you for watching this video. If you want to watch more content, please subscribe to our new GBN America YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.